Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.
Now, Jan, today I want to talk to you about nature.
Excellent. And we've got the best person to talk to us about nature and particularly nature restoration.
Yeah, because we're going to be asking questions such as what can businesses do to deal with nature restoration? How can they have a positive impact on nature and not just be negative all the time? Because that's something I'd like to know, because generally all you hear about businesses and nature, it's not good.
But also many businesses draw from nature. And so there is a case that it's really good for them to look after nature in their own operations and to restore it, because that restores their capacity to draw raw materials from nature or to have an ecosystem that operates well for them. And I don't think companies necessarily won't care about nature restoration, but we'll find out about that.
We're going to have one of those episodes today where you're the positive person about the world and I'm the negative person about the world, aren't we?
Imagine that. Yeah. Imagine that.
It does happen occasionally. Let us welcome our guest, because today we've got Dr. Tim Lamont, who, and this is another brilliant title, he is the 1851 Royal Commission Research Fellow in the Lancaster Environment Centre. And Tim does lots of work around nature restoration and companies' contributions. 1851 Royal Commission Research Fellow. I've not asked him, and he doesn't look this old. He can't surely have been here for 170-something years.
No, I haven't been here for 170 years, which is quite a relief, to be perfectly honest. But
Don't let your employers hear you say that.
The funding body that currently funds my research has. So they were set up in 1851.
That makes a lot more sense. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So what I'd like to get an idea of straight away, Tim, is your research background and how you've come to be involved in understanding nature restoration.
Absolutely. So I was trained as an ecologist. I currently work as a marine ecologist. I work primarily on tropical coral reefs. Tropical coral reefs are in quite a lot of trouble at the moment. There's been a huge amount of damage to these ecosystems all around the world. And so understandably, there's been a really strong focus recently amongst both researchers and conservationists and practitioners and people who look after coral reefs in understanding how we can rebuild and restore them. So nature restoration has come sort of front and center in the research that I do. And as I've done that, I've come to understand as an ecologist that many of the world's businesses are leading the way in lots of ways and are really interested in contributing to this global effort to restore both coral reefs and other ecosystems as well.
There's always lots of news about coral reefs, and it never is good. I told you I was going to be negative, Jan. It never is good, although recently I do remember hearing something about the potential to create an artificial coral reef, which might be able to withstand warmer oceans and therefore help, their sustainability and their longevity. So your research background very much in coral, has it been a natural progression then towards understanding nature restoration beyond coral reefs?
I think it's been something that I've personally been quite determined to do, and I wouldn't be unusual in that, I don't think. There's lots of coral reef scientists who maybe started their career or in recent years have found themselves describing really very depressing trends of degradation and destruction of these ecosystems, and then have made this decision to try and contribute to a better future, to try and contribute to solutions-focused thinking and positive thinking about how we can restore and rebuild ecosystems rather than simply charting their decline.
So why is nature restoration necessary and important? And I feel that it's obvious why nature restoration is necessary, and there are three people sat in the studio here who are part of a race that are probably behind the fact that we need to do nature restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true that our generation is probably the one that is dealing with the greatest levels of environmental damage by humans at any point in human history. But it's also true, and I find this very inspiring, that our generation is equipped with more and better tools to rebuild nature than any other generation before us. So I think we stand at this really critical and important moment in history where the damage has never been greater, but also our opportunity to fix it has never been greater.
Before we move on, and I know you've got questions to ask, Jan, I just want to thank Tim for putting me in the same generation as him, because I don't know, I'm just looking at him, I think he was a good 10 or 15 years younger than I am. And therefore, thank you very much.
We're all in the same generation here.
That's what I was thinking as well. And I have an even greater stretch between Tim's generation and my generation. But this might also be a good time to talk about how Tim and I met.
You make
Tim,
it sound like you're on some kind of dating app there, Jan. We're talking about being in different generations, and now let's talk about how I met Tim. This is going to be a real strange story.
It's an unconventional research, but
yes.
Yes. Well, it was kind of like a date in a way, because we met through our common connector, and our common connector is Henrik Osterblom from the Stockholm Resilience Centre, who we've had on the podcast before. And when I was moving to Lancaster, he said there's great people in the corals team. And I know that he knows the corals team, and at some stage someone may have said to Tim, there's somebody who's not an entire idiot across in the management school called Jan Bivington, hold yourself back, Paul, and go and have a chat to her. So it started off with this conversation with him coming to me saying, well, let's figure out what companies are doing, which companies should we pick. And so between us, we managed to figure out that the people to survey for this first publication was the largest global listed companies. And from there, it went on from there. So it might be a nice time to ask Tim. So that's my story of how I met Tim, but Tim might have a different story as to why he ventured out of LAC and came across to the management school.
Absolutely. I think that story is a reasonable telling, other than you'll be pleased to know, Jan, that people are even more complimentary about you in the Environment Centre than you make out.
They don't know you well enough.
No, I fear that's the case.
But yes, in the Environment Centre and in the Coral Reefs Group particularly, we were really interested in understanding what the total contribution of the world's large businesses to global ecosystem restoration targets was. And, how much of a difference were these big, powerful organizations making? And so we set about building a team to answer that question, and Jan was an obvious person to help us build that team and contribute to it. And we came up with this idea of surveying the sustainability reports of 100 of the world's biggest businesses as a sort of representative cohort. What we quite quickly found was that although lots of them were talking in general terms about making contributions to ecosystem restoration and leading projects and contributing to efforts around the world, it was almost impossible to pin down exactly how much they were doing, because there was almost no detail at all given in the reporting that they gave us. So we set out to answer that question, well, how much are we contributing? And the resounding answer back was, we've got no idea.
And you told me I should be positive about these companies, Jan.
Well, I'm going to talk you round to that, because we could have stopped the study there and said, oh, there's no information, how ghastly, that's horrible, and abandon it. But we didn't. And I think this is where Tim and his colleagues were an absolute inspiration to me, as they said, okay, so why are they not talking about this? And one possible reason might be that they don't know how. They might be doing great things, but they don't know how to articulate it in their reports. So part of the paper, the second part of the paper, when it's sort of after it gets past the goodness, there's nothing to see here, is what could we see? And so, Tim, I wonder if you can talk us through the principles that you derived from restoration science and presented in that paper as a way of companies being able to think about how they might tell their stories around their restoration work.
Absolutely, yeah. So this team that we pulled together of 10 different authors was designed such that we had people who worked in lots of different areas of the world, on lots of different types of restoration, in lots of different ecosystem types, in lots of different socioeconomic contexts. So we were confident that as a team collectively, we had experience of ecosystem restoration in lots of different contexts around the world. And that was important, because we then wanted to pull together principles of good practice in ecosystem restoration and what that looks like. And so to give you examples of some of those principles, the first principle we had was about the mitigation hierarchy. And that says that there's no point doing ecosystem restoration if you're still going to be damaging the same ecosystem in other places. And so you have to sort of clean up your act before you can start repairing the damage you've done. Another principle is one of inclusive governance, and that says that people local to the area in which you're working should have power in the decisions that you make and in the way that you're restoring this ecosystem and the way that it's governed. Another principle is one of permanence. So it's not all right to just plant trees and then walk away and assume that they'll grow and turn into a nice ecosystem. You have to commit to these projects long term and maintain them and see them from the start all the way until they've become a fully functioning ecosystem, which then needs protecting in its own right. So these are long-term projects. And another principle is transparency. Talking about this stuff is important. Collecting data to demonstrate the impacts and sharing that data openly is important, both so other people can learn from your success and also so that we can call out greenwash where it exists and we can tell the difference between projects that are genuinely making a positive impact on the world and those which aren't working. So these principles we think apply to ecosystem restoration in whatever domain you're doing it. And in whatever geographical context. So we've been thinking about ways that company reporting could reflect these holistic principles that come from restoration science, such that we could be much more confident about the work that businesses are doing around the world.
From your experience of working with these companies, Tim, do you think they actually do care about nature restoration?
I do, yes. Yeah, I do. And I think there's two reasons for that primarily. The first is one that Jan has already mentioned in the introduction, and that's that many of these companies know that they rely on nature, that the things they trade and the ways they trade them and the reasons that people buy their products in some cases are inherently linked to healthy natural systems. And these companies know that by investing in nature restoration, they're investing in their own future. And the second reason is because I think it's too easy to think of companies as being either faceless entities or inherently evil entities, and you forget that they're actually made up of people. You know, and broadly, people care about nature. You know, there are some exceptions to that, but I think that we all have in us something called the biophilia hypothesis. We all have in us something that connects us to nature, that makes us eager to spend time in nature and understand nature and value nature. And so the people that make up companies have that as well.
Allow me to be pessimistic still for a few moments. Are there regulations in place that companies must abide by when it comes to nature restoration or not?
There are regulations, and those regulations are important, and I think they have a big role to play. Jan's taught me a lot about those regulations over the last year or so, and we've really enjoyed understanding more about how they work and then how our work can helpfully influence those regulations. Jan, that might be something you want to follow up a little more on.
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to your conversation about the mitigation hierarchy as well, is that not all companies are restoring exactly where they're operating. There may be an area, particularly of coral reefs or another area of the ocean or coastal regions or forests, that could do with restoration efforts. And so several companies, outside of what they're legally mandated to do, might get together to co-invest in achieving those outcomes. So it's not a one-for-one, I've caught a fish, so I put a fish stock back. It's a much more holistic overview of how you might imagine corporations acting on this, and also acting together. And then ultimately, and this is a bit of a dream, but we are seeing some signals that it might come to pass, for corporations to think of themselves as biosphere stewards, which would lend them to be really sound in their own operations, quite possibly going beyond the base regulatory requirements, but also to then spot that actually we need to be restoring, or Carl Falk has a really super word of revitalising the whole of our ecosphere, so we can all live better.
I'm still going to remain pessimistic for just another moment. When it comes to it, do you think if the regulations weren't there, the companies would still be doing something?
Yeah, I think they would be, but because I'm aware of lots of companies who are doing stuff that is independent of the regulations. Mm-hmm. So that tells me that there is enthusiasm beyond just that which they're mandated to do. But I still think the regulations are valuable because I think they give companies a really helpful steer as to how they can best channel their enthusiasm for maximum efficiency and effectiveness in the work they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to move on a little bit, most of the work you've done is focused on large corporations. Do you think the principles around nature restoration still apply to smaller companies, though?
I do. And when we were designing these principles and writing them, we had that very much in mind, that these principles should work on all sorts of different scales. I think the way that you implement them might be different depending on the size of your company. For example, the way that you monitor a restored ecosystem that is maybe the size of this room would be very different to the way that you monitor a restored ecosystem the size of Cumbria. You'd use different methods. And I think the same would apply to lots of the principles, that you would go about them in slightly different ways. But the underlying values in the principles should be the same, whatever scale you're working at.
We always seem to come back to Cumbria during this podcast, and we did a whole series of the Lake District farmers that talked about Cumbria. And when we've talked about various other things, people have sort of brought Cumbria in as well. Everything seems to be relating to Cumbria.
You see, I live in Cumbria, so I for a moment there forgot that we're in Lancashire at the moment.
No,
Maybe we can edit in Lancashire instead.
No, let's not, because I'm from Cumbria too. I live in Cumbria and I'm from Cumbria. And for those who are listening who don't necessarily know, it's a big, very rural county to the north of Lancashire in the very far northwest of England, and it's a lovely place.
It's also quite sort of, particularly if you're local, it's quite conceivable. It's like many other things get turned into the number of football pitches or the number of times that the country Wales goes into something. So I think Cumbria is becoming the new Wales in this respect.
I don't know how big Cumbria is compared to Wales. I think you could probably fit 5 Cumbrias into a Wales.
I was about to guess around that as well. Maybe we can fact check it and then discover that we're both horribly wrong.
I think that's a good case for fact checks. But also, this is probably quite a good time to ask, what next? Because when we do this, undertake scientific investigations, we write the papers and we work really hard to get through the review process. That's never really the end of the process, if you like. That's the start of something else. So what next for you, Tim, in this space?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And for me, in my career so far, I've written 25 or 30 research papers, and this is the one I'm most excited about because this is the one that I can see has the best potential to make a difference in the world. And so what next for me is really trying to use the research we've done to improve the quality of business-led ecosystem restoration projects. And I think we can do that in 2 main ways. So the first is by influencing policy. And so that's by starting conversations and by working together with the people who write these regulations we've talked about. And by inputting the research we've done and saying, well, look, these regulations are great, but we think we could make them even better if we put these tweaks in and put these little added suggestions in place. And then as well as policy, the second thing I think we can do is start influencing practice on the ground, because as well as being driven by policy, a lot of these businesses' actions are driven by what they see their peers do and what examples they see from other projects around the world. So we're working with some case study projects and some case study businesses to try and directly improve the way that they're restoring ecosystems and reporting on that work. And we hope that will then start to have a ripple effect, and changes will sort of permeate through sectors and other groups of businesses as a result of that.
Will Jan still be involved in this work, or have you given her the hook now?
No, I very much hope Jan will be involved in this work. She's driving a lot of it and leading a lot of it forward.
I think I'm quite a good bridge for our natural scientists into some parts of the world of policy, and in particular, during the time when we were doing this work, the Global Reporting Initiative was going through an update of its standard. Now, of course, Tim would have never known, the Global Reporting Initiative existed, or that they had a standard, or they're updating it. But I knew they were, and I knew that it was quite weak on restoration. And so Tim had a look through it and wrote a comment letter to them that laid out what a good disclosure would look like in that respect. And I think, we get excited about strange things, I grant you that. But I think, I was excited, and I think Tim was excited as well, that language and those principles have been picked up and are now in that standard. And in some ways, that's the dream of some of our work. If you hardwire what is good in the things that affect everyone, then you don't have to go around correcting every time and trying to make something okay. But our research work creates a context within which everyone can do better.
So we've talked about a lot of these companies who are doing it for themselves, who are being very proactive, who are going out there and taking positive action sometimes even beyond where they're regulated to take this action. Are they more the norm, or are they outliers? Are they weird examples almost for the way stuff is at the moment?
I think probably it depends what sector you're in. And so a lot of the work that we've started doing as we start to explore this area has been with companies that are most willing and able to get involved in this. So, for example, I went to a business summit that was a big international meeting of the outdoor sector. So people who make, rain jackets and rucksacks and sports equipment and all that sort of thing. And those businesses are really very enthusiastic, almost all of them, about the idea of giving back to nature, about, operating responsibly within nature, because their supply chains and their markets are so inherently tied to people enjoying being in healthy ecosystems outside. And so almost everybody I spoke to at that summit, and everybody who came and spoke to me after the talk I gave, was very enthusiastic and would say something that approximately equated to, we really want to do a good job of this, and we just don't know how. Can you help us? And so those people, I think, are brilliant to work with, because the enthusiasm is there, and they want to hear how they can do things better. And hopefully, as a team of ecologists working with accountants and people who understand and study businesses, we're the perfect team to deliver that.
In our last episode, Jan, we spoke to Pentland Brands, and whilst we weren't talking to them about nature restoration and stuff, we spoke to them about the B Corp status and their very positivity around issues such as sustainability and such. So I guess that kind of echoes there, because they're the kind of company they've got brands such as Berghaus and such that are those kinds of brands, the outdoor clothing thing, that kind of fits in just exactly with what Tim was saying there.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think to the companies that are in the Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship Coalition, they do quite a lot of restoration work, and in particular, it's something that they engage their staff in, and they are, some of it's professionally based restoration, but other ones in cleaning up nature and thinking about, right down to beach cleans through to restoring forests on upstream of fish farms. People are really drawn to that and love doing it. And I suppose it comes back to a term that you used, Tim, biophilia, the love of this natural world, because we are part of it. We are creatures that have lived, for many thousands of years in the natural world. So it's not surprising that as individuals we'd be moved by it and moved to protect it and to restore it and to revitalise it.
So with these companies that are positive, do they balance out the companies that maybe aren't doing the stuff here and aren't having that impact?
That's a big question. In some ways, that's the question at the centre of all of this, right? Whether or not you believe that corporates and businesses can play an influential and positive role in this. And I think in some ways there's you can zoom out on this question and think about this not just for businesses, but for all organizations, and even everybody you think about, whether you think about this at a level of countries or businesses or individuals. At one end of the spectrum, there's going to be people who buy into this and are doing everything they can already. At the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be people who don't care or don't want to hear and are doing absolutely nothing. And in the middle, there's going to be people who either have yet to be convinced or have yet to understand what they can do to most efficiently and most effectively help. And I think those people in the middle are where we need to work, whether that's at the level of countries or businesses or individuals. Those are the people who it's possible to convince and it's possible to get some positive change out of. What would you say to that, Jan, to that question? It's a tricky one.
It is, but I think your answer is the right one. And it's also kind of unknowable in some ways as well. And I think building off that, and this is really to help you, Paul, because you need a wee bit of help here.
Thank you, Jan.
Can you give us an inspirational example from your experience of seeing restoration on the ground? Because I know that you spend time in environments restoring them, because your out of office says, I'm sorry I'm not here. I'm somewhere gloriously sunny among coral reefs and interesting fish, and you are still in the rain in Lancaster. All words to that effect.
I think that might be your translation of my out of office, Jan, in fairness.
Having worked with people in the Environment Centre, Jan, you're entirely correct that they just get all the nice cushy numbers and go and spend 6 months, sunbathing on a beach, pretending to study the coral and the ocean temperatures and stuff.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that people who've never had a jellyfish sting or a mosquito bite at work say. Working in the tropics isn't always as glamorous as people make it out to be.
1 week of slight discomfort because of a mosquito sting compared to 6 months of sunbathing.
That's it. No, but in all seriousness, no, I'm fortunate and privileged to work with some very inspirational projects that help me. Yeah, they help me believe what could be possible, and they give me a real encouraging insight into a better future that we hope we can together start to create. So one of those projects is I work with one of the biggest coral restoration programs in the world, which was started by Mars, the big global mega corporation who make Mars bars, most famously, but also lots of other confectionery, and they also make lots of pet food. So they're aware that they, particularly through their pet food business, they have a big impact on the oceans. They have they use a lot of fish in the products that they make. So they wanted to do something positive for ocean health and for marine restoration. And they identified through one of their factory links in Indonesia, they identified an opportunity to develop and scale up attempts to restore damaged coral reefs. They've now been doing that for 10 or 15 years. They're now working across the tropics in lots of different locations, and they've managed to really effectively bring a business mind approach to scaling up operations into this restoration space. So while most of the world's coral reef restoration projects are really quite small, the way that Mars's business is set up to work allows them to get much more people involved, to work on much larger spatial scales, and it's opening up new possibilities in coral restoration. We're starting to see that we're able to restore much larger areas of reef in many more places than we previously thought might be possible.
It's always nice to end with a positive note, an inspirational note. We've been getting lots of examples of inspiration that people have been gathering from their work, so they all try to make me feel positive. Or generally, it's you that we need to make feel more positive, Jan, and so it's good. It's good to have that example.
Well, it's always hard to tell because it depends on the day as well, and the background of global loss of nature and biodiversity is really quite devastating. But here is one story which we hope you've enjoyed as listeners about what can be done.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Jan, that was fascinating, even though it's your research.
Well, it's yes, I shouldn't. Well, it was quite interesting because Tim said it was like he was really excited by it, but I was really excited by it as well because we observe what companies do, but we really don't know about the ecological significance, and that's why I really like working with natural scientists. So it's pretty exciting to work with Tim and the wider team, and actually to feel like there's something really tangible there.
And it was good for me because you didn't go too much into the accounting side of it, because I know obviously the reason you'll have been involved is because of your business accounting side, and you know me in accounting, Jan, you know me in accounting. But it's absolutely fascinating to see how you can go from working on coral reefs to then seeing how companies treat coral reefs and how companies can help to do nature restoration on coral reefs and anything and everything else in the world.
And there are some companies that have been in touch with us after reading the paper, because it was published in Science, which is always a very public place to publish things, and it gets picked up in newspapers. So we have had quite a lot of companies being in touch. So some people are trying to work out whether or not those principles work. And so we're almost at the time where they're going to start feeding back to us. So this project will run and run, and my hopes, but also my view is that it will probably run and run as well.
And as long as we haven't scared him off, maybe Tim will come back and join us.
I hope so.
Some things to mention since we've fact checked since the podcast. Tim is actually 30, so he's very definitely in a different generation to me. And also, Cumbria that you can fit 3.5 Cumbrias into a Wales. So, I should stress the country of Wales, there's not going to be a giant humpback comes and tries to eat the county. That would be scary.
And could we make Wales a bit bigger, either historically or letting the tide go out and giving a bit more mudflats? Would that help?
Well, as far as historically goes, I believe that there's various kings of England who've taken chunks out of Wales, and therefore Wales has got smaller as time has gone on. And as regards the tide going out, I have actually pointed this out, that the tidal range in Morecambe Bay, which is on the south of Cumbria, is so great that therefore I think that Cumbria would grow massively in terms of it. In fact, if you want to have some fun, go to Google Maps and look at a place called Walney Island. And if you click on Walney Island on Google Maps with the general sort of the coloured view, you'll see an island that looks really funny shape. And then click on the satellite view and you'll see that the island gets about half the size because the tidal range is such that Google Maps thinks the island is so much bigger. It almost doesn't think it's an island.
And of course, that's where you're from originally, not just Cumbria, but at exactly that island.
Yes, it's the reason I know it. It's not, I'm not just studying random Cumbrian islands. The 10th biggest island in England, by the way, just in case you were wondering.
Excellent.
Yes, it's a lovely place.
Excellent. And I think by the end we cheered you up as well with some inspiration. Go on, say yes.
Oh, it's hard to cheer me up on a day when I don't want to be cheered up. But yes, you've cheered me up to a reasonable amount. I'm no longer deadly depressed. I'm just slightly depressed.
That's not bad.
about the state of the planet. That's it. But no, that's good. So next time, Jan, we're going to be welcoming someone else who you work with quite a lot on slightly similar areas, but different. And that's Dr. Neo Sivci. And we're going to be talking about how companies can affect nature and the task force for nature-related financial disclosures. We've got a task force, Jan. It's been a long time since we've had to mention a task force, but that's what we're going to be talking about.
Indeed, and for listeners, if you've enjoyed what you've just heard, hang on and listen to the next one as well, because these two things fit together in quite complementary ways.
Yeah, so do join us then. Until then, thank you very much for listening. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.